The arrival Marcus Rivera had always imagined his first contact with alien life would involve more diplomacy and less blood dripping from his forehead. The escape pod spun like a broken carnival ride as it crashed through the energy barriers of the massive Veltharian warship, finally coming to rest against what appeared to be a wall made of living metal that pulsed with soft blue veins. The hatch hissed open, releasing him in a cloud of steam and the bitter smell of fried electronics. Marcus stumbled out, his engineering uniform torn and his dark hair matted with sweat. The artificial gravity felt wrong, too light, making each step feel like he might float away at any moment. Well, he muttered to himself, wiping blood from a cut above his eye. This is definitely not going according to the manual. The corridor he found himself in defied human understanding of architecture. The walls curved impossibly, covered in patterns that seemed to shift when he wasn't looking. Directly at them, soft light emanated from everywhere and nowhere, casting no shadows. The air tasted of ozone and something floral that made his sinuses tingle. Before he could take more than a few steps, a section of the wall simply dissolved, revealing three figures in flowing robes that seemed to be cut from liquid starlight. Their faces were hidden behind masks that resembled stylized suns, but Marcus could feel their attention like physical weight. They spoke in a language that sounded like wind chimes mixed with whale song. One of them gestured, and Marcus felt a strange tingling in his mind. Suddenly, their words became clear. The human debris will be processed in detention level 7, the center figure announced in a voice that carried the authority of someone, used to being obeyed without question. Marcus wanted to object to being called debris, but his legs chose that moment to remember they'd just survived a crash. He collapsed against the wall, vision blurring. The last thing he saw before unconsciousness claimed him was another figure approaching, this one smaller, moving with a grace that seemed almost apologetic. The awakening. When Marcus woke, he found himself in a room that was either a very comfortable prison cell or a very sterile luxury hotel suite. The walls were the same living metal as the corridors, but here they pulsed with warmer colors, golds and deep purples that somehow made him think of sunset over wheat fields back on Earth. The bed he lay on adjusted itself to his movements, responding to his body temperature and position with unsettling intelligence. A soft chime sounded, and part of the wall became transparent, revealing a view of space that took his breath away. Stars wheeled slowly past, and in the distance he could see the blue-green marble of an unknown world. "You are awake." Marcus spun toward the voice, wincing as his injured ribs protested. Standing near what might have been a door was the most beautiful creature he had ever seen, and that realization hit him like a physical blow. She was humanoid, but clearly not human. Her skin had a pale blue tint that seemed to shift between silver and pearl depending on the light. Crystalline patterns traced delicate lines across her cheekbones and down her neck, disappearing beneath a simple gray garment that marked her as servant class. Her hair was white as starlight, pulled back to reveal ears that came to gentle points, but it was her eyes that stopped him cold, large, expressive, and colored like amethyst shot through with gold. "I am Zena," she said, her voice carrying a melodic quality that made even simple words sound like music. "I have been assigned to ensure your physical requirements are met during your detention." Marcus struggled to sit up, acutely aware that he was wearing some kind of medical gown that felt like it was made from woven moonbeams. "Detention? I prefer to think of it as an unscheduled diplomatic visit. Something that might have been amusement," flickered across her features before her expression returned to careful neutrality. "Your species has interesting perspectives on imprisonment." "It's called optimism," Marcus said, attempting to stand. His legs held this time, though the room swayed slightly. "We're famous for it. Well, infamous, depending on who you ask." Zena moved closer, and Marcus caught a scent like rain on warm stone. She gestured to a small table that hadn't been there moments before, laden with items that looked like they belonged in an art gallery rather than a cafeteria. "You must consume nutrients," she said. "Your biology requires regular fuel intake to maintain optimal function." Marcus approached the table cautiously. The food, if that's what it was, consisted of various geometric shapes in colors that didn't exist in nature. One cube pulsed with internal light, another seemed to be made of crystallized music, and a third defied description entirely. "This looks like someone fed a rainbow to a mathematician," he said, picking up what appeared to be utensils, designed by someone who had only heard cutlery described in a fever dream. "Please tell me none of this is still alive." "All nutrition. Cubes are processed to eliminate consciousness," Zena replied with what Marcus was starting to recognize as deadpan humor. "Mostly." He paused, a glowing fork halfway to his mouth. "Mostly? The blue ones sometimes dream, but only of pleasant things." Marcus set down the fork and looked at her carefully. There was definitely amusement in those remarkable eyes now, though she was trying to hide it behind servant protocols. "You're messing with me, aren't you?" "I am unfamiliar with this expression, but if it means providing false information for entertainment purposes, then perhaps." Despite everything, the crash, the imprisonment, the fact that he was possibly millions of miles from home, Marcus found himself smiling. "You know, for an alien prison, this place has a surprisingly good sense of humor." The rule Zena's expression shifted, becoming more serious. "There are protocols I must follow. Interaction between detention subjects and service personnel is restricted to necessity only. Extended conversation is forbidden." "What happens if we break the rules?" She was quiet for a long moment, her crystalline markings seeming to dim slightly. "Reassignment for me? For you, the consequences would be more severe." Marcus studied her face, noting the way her hands had clenched slightly at her sides. "But you're still here, still talking to me. You are curious about our food preparation methods. I am providing necessary cultural context to prevent nutritional distress." "Right," Marcus said slowly. "Cultural context, very important." "Extremely important," she agreed solemnly, though her eyes sparkled. He decided to test the boundaries. "So if I were to ask about your world, that would be prohibited sharing of strategic information. And if I told you about Earth? Unnecessary disclosure of enemy intelligence. But if I happen to mention that we have these things called dogs, which are basically four-legged friends who love unconditionally and occasionally eat furniture." Zena tilted her head, those pointed ears perking up with obvious interest. "This is relevant to nutrition because happiness aids digestion. It's a scientific fact." "I see. And these dogs, they consume furniture for nutritional purposes?" Marcus grinned. "Only the really comfortable chairs? It's a delicacy." For the first time since he'd awakened, Zena smiled. It transformed her entire face, making the crystalline patterns along her cheekbones catch the light like tiny prisms. The effect was breathtaking. "Your species forms emotional bonds with furniture-consuming quadrupeds?" "Among other things. We're a complicated bunch." She moved closer to refill his water container, and Marcus caught that rain and stone scent again. This close, he could see that her crystalline markings weren't tattoos or jewelry, but part of her skin, pulsing faintly with her heartbeat. "What do your people bond with?" he asked quietly. Zena froze, the water container suspended in her hands. For a moment, Marcus thought he'd pushed too far, crossed some line that would end their tentative connection. Then she spoke, so softly he had to strain to hear. "We are not permitted to form bonds. Emotional attachment interferes with duty." The weight of loneliness in her voice hit Marcus like a physical blow. He understood suddenly why she was lingering, why she was bending the rules to talk with him. She was as isolated in her role as he was in his cell. "That sounds lonely," he said. She met his eyes then, and for a moment, her careful servant's mask slipped entirely. What he saw underneath made his breath catch: intelligence, curiosity, and a deep, aching solitude that mirrored his own. "Loneliness is inefficient," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "So is a lot of good stuff. Art, music, falling in love." She stepped back as if he'd struck her. "I must complete my duties." But as she moved toward the door, Marcus called, "Out." "Zena?" She paused without turning around. "Thank you for the cultural context." Her shoulders relaxed slightly. "You are welcome, Marcus Rivera." The way she said his name, with careful precision and something that might have been fondness, made his heart race. As the door sealed behind her, Marcus realized that he was in more trouble than he'd thought. And it had nothing to do with being a prisoner on an alien warship. It had everything to do with the way Zena's smile had made him forget, for just a moment, that they were supposed to be enemies. The nutrition. Cubes, when he finally tried them, tasted like memories of food rather than food itself. But somehow that seemed appropriate. Everything about this situation was built on the memory of rules, the ghost of protocols that were already starting to feel less important than the living, breathing connection he'd felt with a servant girl who wasn't supposed to have a name, much less a smile that could stop his heart. Outside his window, the stars wheeled on in their eternal dance, indifferent to the small revolution beginning in a detention cell where two beings from different worlds had discovered that some things, curiosity, loneliness, the simple joy of making someone laugh, were universal languages that needed no translation. The discovery. 3 days had passed since Marcus first arrived, and Zena's visits had become the bright points in an otherwise monotonous existence. She came twice daily now, always with some official reason: nutritional assessment, atmospheric monitoring, cellular regeneration therapy. But they both knew the real purpose was the conversation that followed. Marcus had learned that Zena's crystalline markings weren't just decorative. They were empathic receivers, allowing her to sense the emotional states of those around her. It explained why she always seemed to know when he was feeling particularly homesick or frustrated with his confinement. "Your emotional patterns are unusually complex for a human," she had told him during yesterday's visit. "Most of your species we've encountered display simple response patterns: fear, anger, desperation. You show curiosity where others show terror." "Maybe the others didn't have such good company," Marcus had replied, and watched those crystalline patterns pulse with what he was learning meant pleasure. Now, as he waited for her daily visit, Marcus was studying the strange writing that covered one wall of his cell. The symbols seemed to shift and flow like living things, and he'd begun to suspect they weren't just decoration. He traced one particularly complex glyph with his finger, and the wall suddenly became transparent, revealing a corridor he hadn't seen before. That's when he saw them. Commander Vex strode through the corridor, his midnight blue uniform marking him as high military rank. Behind him walked another human, a woman with short red hair and the kind of bearing that spoke of authority earned through competence rather than politics. Marcus's heart stopped as he recognized her. Dr. Rebecca Kane, his former colleague and the leading xenobiologist on the human expedition that had brought him to this sector of space. She was supposed to be dead, killed when their research vessel was destroyed 3 weeks ago. She was very much alive, and she was walking freely through a Veltharian warship. Marcus pressed closer to the transparent wall, straining to hear their conversation. The translation implant the Veltharians had given him picked up fragments. "The human colonies will never suspect." Perfect cover for the real operation. Both species will destroy each other while we harvest what remains. The rest faded as they moved out of range, but Marcus had heard enough. His blood ran cold as the implications hit him. This wasn't a random capture. This wasn't even a war between humans and Veltharians. This was something else entirely, and both species were being manipulated. The wall became opaque again, just as the door to his cell dissolved, admitting Xena with her usual tray of impossible food. But this time. Marcus could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her crystalline markings pulsed with agitation. "You're upset," he said without preamble. She nearly dropped the tray. "I am performing routine service delivery." Xena. He moved closer, close enough to see the fine details of her markings as they shifted from purple to deep blue. "Something's wrong. I can tell." For a moment, she looked like she might deny it. Then her composure cracked. "There are things happening aboard this vessel that do not align with our stated mission parameters." Marcus felt his pulse quicken. "What kind of things?" She set down the tray with trembling hands. "I should not speak of this. It violates every protocol, every law of my service." "Forget the protocols," Marcus said urgently. "I just saw something that suggests we're both in more danger than we thought." Her amethyst eyes met his, and in them he saw fear and confusion and something else. Trust. She was choosing to trust him, despite everything she'd been taught about duty and obedience. "There have been meetings," she said quietly, "between Commander Vex and beings who are not Veltharian. They speak of humans and my people as if we are both resources to be managed." Marcus's suspicions crystallized into certainty. "Resources for what?" "I do not know, but I have heard references to harvesting, to genetic material, to something called the Synthesis Project." Her voice dropped to barely a whisper. "They speak of war as if it is a tool, not a tragedy." Marcus told her what he had seen, about Dr. Caney's apparent survival and cooperation with the Veltharians. As he spoke, Xena's markings shifted through a spectrum of colors he'd never seen before, finally settling into a pattern that looked like storm clouds. "Your colleague is not a prisoner," she said finally. "She has quarters in the command section. She dines with the senior staff." Then she's either been turned or she was working with them from the beginning. Marcus felt sick. Either way, both our peoples are being played. They stood in silence, the weight of revelation settling between them. Then Xena spoke, her voice stronger than before. "There is something else. Tomorrow, we reach the Nexus station. It is where the final phase of whatever they are planning will begin. If we are going to act, it must be soon." Marcus stared at her. "We?" For the first time since he'd known her, Xena smiled without any trace of the careful servant's mask. "Did you think I would let them use my people as pawns? Did you think I would abandon the first being in my life who has treated me as more than a convenience?" The word hung in the air between them, loaded with implications that went far beyond their current crisis. Marcus reached out instinctively, then stopped, remembering the rules about contact. Xena saw the gesture and the hesitation that followed. Without breaking eye contact, she reached out and took his hand in hers. The moment their skin touched, Marcus felt a shock that had nothing to do with alien biology and everything to do with connection. Her hand was warm, her crystalline markings flaring brightly before settling into a steady, soft glow. "The rules that separate us are made by the same beings who would see both our peoples destroyed," she said. "I choose to break them." The plan they spent the next several hours planning. Xena's access codes would get them to the communication array, where Marcus could send a warning to the human fleet. His engineering knowledge could help them sabotage the ship's weapon systems, preventing it from participating in whatever trap was being set. It was a desperate plan with a low chance of success, but it was better than sitting helplessly while two civilizations were manipulated into mutual destruction. There's one more thing, Xena said as they finalized the details. If we succeed, if we stop this conspiracy, what happens then? To us? Marcus looked at her, at this remarkable being who had risked everything to stand with him against impossible odds. I don't know, he admitted. The rules that kept us apart might not matter anymore, or they might matter more than ever. And if we fail, then at least we fail together. She squeezed his hand, her markings pulsing with determination. Together is a good word in any language. The next morning brought alarms, and the sensation of the ship dropping out of faster-than-light travel. Through his window, Marcus could see the Nexus station, a massive structure that looked like a mechanical flower blooming in the darkness of space. Ships from dozens of species were docked at its petals, including vessels he recognized as human destroyers. Xena arrived earlier than usual, her servant's robes replaced by a maintenance technician's outfit that would give her broader access to the ship's systems. It's time, she said simply. They made their way through the ship's service corridors, moving with purpose, but not haste. Xena's codes opened every door, her presence explaining Marcus's if anyone asked. The crystalline patterns on her face had shifted to a neutral blue-gray that Marcus had learned meant focused determination. The communication array was housed in a chamber that looked like the inside of a geode, all crystal formations and softly pulsing lights. Marcus went to work immediately, his fingers flying over controls that were alien but followed logical principles he could deduce. I'm in, he said after several tense minutes. Sending the warning now. Behind him, Xena worked at a different console, her movements precise and graceful. I am uploading the evidence we gathered to both your fleet and mine. Whatever happens, the truth will survive. That's when the door exploded inward. Commander Vex strode through the smoking entrance, followed by Dr. Kane and a squad of guards. The Veltharian commander's face was twisted with rage, but Kaney looked merely disappointed. Really, Marcus, she said with a sigh. You always were too idealistic for your own good. Rebecca, Marcus stepped protectively in front of Xena, though it was a futile gesture. How long have you been working with them? Working with them? Kaney laughed. Marcus, I'm not working with the Veltharians. The Veltharians are working with me, with us. Us? Commander Vex spoke for the first time, his voice carrying the same authority Marcus remembered from their first meeting. The Synthesis Collective has been guiding both human and Veltharian development for centuries. War was always the intended outcome, a way to eliminate the weak and preserve the strongest genetic materials for our use. Marcus felt Xena's hand slip into his, her markings now blazing with defiant silver. You're talking about genocide. We're talking about evolution, Kaney corrected. The creation of a new species that combines the best traits of both races, a species that will serve the collective's greater purpose. And what purpose is that? Kaney's smile was cold as winter space. Conquest, Marcus. There are thousands of civilizations out there, all ripe for harvesting. But we needed the right tools for the job. Commander Vex gestured to his guards. Enough conversation. Secure the prisoners. As the guards moved forward, Xena squeezed Marcus's hand once more. Did your warning get through? Marcus glanced at the communication console, where a single green light pulsed steadily. It got through. Then we've won, regardless of what happens next. The guards reached them, weapons raised. Marcus prepared for the end, but he felt no fear. Beside him, Xena stood tall and proud, her crystalline markings shining like stars. Then the ship shuddered. Alarms began wailing throughout the vessel as explosions echoed from the direction of the docking bays. Through the chamber's crystal walls, Marcus could see human and Veltharian ships breaking away from the Nexus station, their weapons trained not on each other, but on the station itself. Commander Vex snarled into his communicator. Report! What is happening? The response came crackling back. Sir, both human and Veltharian fleets have received intelligence about the Synthesis Collective. They're attacking the station in a coordinated strike. The conspiracy has been exposed. Dr. Kane's face went pale. That's impossible. The conditioning protocols should have prevented them from cooperating. Apparently, Marcus said with grim satisfaction, you underestimated the power of truth. The ship shuddered again, more violently this time. In the chaos that followed, as guards struggled to maintain their footing and Commander Vex shouted increasingly desperate orders, Marcus and Xena made their choice. Still holding hands, they ran. The resolution. The evacuation pods were in chaos. Beings from multiple species scrambling for escape as the Nexus Station's defensive systems turned on the assembled fleets. Marcus and Xena found themselves pushed along with the crowd, their joined hands the only constant in the madness. They managed to secure seats in a pod that launched just as another section of the ship exploded. Through the pod's viewport, Marcus watched the Nexus Station tear itself apart under the combined assault of the human and Veltharian fleets. Ships that had been preparing for war against each other were now fighting side by side against their common enemy. It's beautiful, Xena said softly, and Marcus realized she was right. There was something magnificent about seeing two species choose cooperation over conflict, truth over manipulation. The pod drifted toward a human destroyer that was broadcasting rescue frequencies. As they prepared to dock, Xena turned to Marcus, with an expression he couldn't quite read. What happens now? She asked. Your people and mine will want to question us. They'll want to understand how this conspiracy was possible. We'll tell them the truth, Marcus said. All of it, including the part about a human and a Veltharian choosing to trust each other when their governments couldn't. And after that, Marcus looked out at the stars, where human and Veltharian ships moved in careful formation, still learning to work together. After that, we figure out how to build something better than what came before. Together. The docking clamps engaged with a soft thud and the pod's door cycled open. On the other side stood a mixed group of human and Veltharian officers, their weapons lowered, but their expressions cautious. A human captain stepped forward. I'm Captain Torres of the UES Determination. Are you the ones who sent the warning? We are, Marcus said, stepping out with Xena beside him. The captain's eyes fixed on their joined hands, then moved to Xena's gently glowing markings. You're the servant who accessed the Veltharian communication logs. I am Xena of the House of Stars, she replied, her voice clear and strong. And I am no one's servant. A Veltharian officer stepped forward, his uniform marking him as a senior commander. The information you provided has prevented a catastrophic war. Both our peoples are in your debt. We don't want debt, Marcus said. We want understanding. We want a future where beings like us don't have to choose between duty and conscience. Captain Torres studied them both carefully. The preliminary report suggests this conspiracy went deeper than we imagined. There will be investigations, trials, restructuring of both our governments. It's going to be a complicated time. Complicated times require simple truths, Xena said. The truth is that connection is stronger than division, that love is more powerful than law, and that sometimes the right choice is also the hardest choice. The Veltharian commander nodded slowly. Perhaps it is time our species learned to see such truths more clearly. As they were escorted deeper into the ship, Marcus felt Xena's hand warm in his. They had no idea what the future would hold, what challenges they would face as representatives of a new kind of cooperation between their peoples. But they would face it together, and that was enough. Behind them, through the ship's viewports, the remains of the Nexus Station continued to burn. But beyond that,